Hey, what's happening? My name is not actually goukigod, and in this video I want to talk about VR. I touched on this topic briefly in my video about the PS4K, but I wanted to discuss it in a bit more detail because it's a conversation I seem to be having a lot at the moment with friends and colleagues. Watching E3 this year, there was one thing that became really apparent to me if it wasn't already. The gaming industry is going all in on VR. It was mentioned in almost every presentation, with loads of games being announced and new hardware like Project Scorpio designed to bring VR into the living room. The gaming industry clearly believes that VR is the next big thing, but here's my question: do you actually give a shit? Now, there's no doubt that VR is very cool and the technology has come a long way since the early days, both in terms of its capability but also in regards to cost. My first experience with VR was at an amusement park when I was 11 or 12. It wasn't a positive experience either. It was a long time ago, but I still remember the headset being huge and you had to stand in this really weird platform thing so you didn't fall over. The graphics and sound quality were pretty terrible and it made me feel quite sick afterwards. This may also have been because the goggles were really heavy and uncomfortable and they also stank like cigarettes. Anyway, back to my point. The fact that it's now possible to have VR in your own home and that the experience is actually good really is a big deal. We even have a choice of headsets at various price points and quality to choose from. But even still, VR, at least for now, is reserved for those with large disposable incomes and the space to use it. Now, before I continue, I'd just like to disclose that I'm making this video as someone who hasn't actually tried VR in its current form, and it might come across as ignorant of me to argue against something that I've not experienced firsthand. Don't get me wrong though, I'm not arguing against VR as a platform. In fact, I'm totally for it. If my situation was different, I'd probably go out and buy one immediately. But that's exactly my point. I'm not in a financial position to give it serious consideration, and I think that many people would be in the same boat. Currently, the entry-level model will set you back roughly $1,000 for Sony's VR solution. And while VR is meant to run on the current PS4, the experience isn't supposed to be great. Given that a poor VR experience can make you physically ill, $1,000 seems like a lot for a subpar experience. If you want better quality, then the Rift or the Vive is probably what you're after, and at $900 Australian for the Vive, plus the cost of a decent rig to run it, the costs start to get a little bit silly. Now, if you're in your mid-20s with minimal responsibilities and the spare cash to drop on VR, then I envy you. But for the rest of us, VR represents a significant financial investment. If you have a family or a significant other, then you'll know that spending upwards of $500 on something as frivolous as VR isn't a decision that you can make on your own. Convincing someone with no interest in the technology that spending that kind of money is a good idea is also not going to be easy. So the cost is obviously a big component in driving interest in VR, but equally important is the software side of things. And right now the selection of games is kind of light. There aren't really any substantial games or big AAA titles that match the presentation and scope of a regular non-VR title. The majority of these games are short. I don't want to say tech demo because this implies that they aren't finished or they lack polish, but in terms of length and content, they don't come close to a non-VR title. Now, of course, it's still early days and no doubt there will be plenty of new and more ambitious titles in the future. Hopefully, as the technology matures and developers get more experience with the platform, we'll start to see larger, more complex games being released, but that will be entirely dependent on the size of the install base. Without a big install base, developers will be apprehensive to invest big dollars into development of VR titles simply because they need to guarantee there'll be enough people to buy them and make a return on their investment. My prediction is that we won't actually start seeing a significant shift in the type and number of games being developed until the hardware becomes more affordable and subsequently more people own it. And of course it will. In a few years' time, the headsets will be much cheaper and no doubt much lighter with better features. They'll probably be much easier to set up too. The Vive, for instance, is notoriously complex and not really designed to be moved from room to room. In fact, the PlayStation VR, Vive and Oculus all require sensors and a minimum area in which to use them. So on top of the cost, you'll also need an appropriate space to use it in. This is fine if you have a spare room or a large living area, but not so much if you live in an apartment. So for now, as cool as the tech is, I don't think it's a product designed or priced for the average gamer. I also think that unfortunately VR needs a killer app. Now, you might argue that the VR experience in itself is the killer app, but I think if the right type of game or other VR experience comes along that captures the imagination of the mass market, then this would change everything. It's a bit of a chicken and egg type scenario. VR needs software to convince people to buy into it, but the hardware needs to be affordable enough to not be a barrier, and that's only going to happen if people buy into it. So as much as I love the idea of VR, I don't think it's close enough to being a reality for me, and therefore I don't really give a shit. Here's another way to look at it. When Lamborghini announce a new and faster model, I'm excited for sure, but at the end of the day, I know that I can't afford it. So I might watch a commercial or read an article about it, but then I'll just get on with my life. Anyway, let me know how you feel, particularly if you're someone who's invested in it and you've actually purchased or pre-ordered a headset. Anyway, that's all I've got for you this video. I want to thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I'm out.